The Galactic Military Academy stretched across 3 moons of Kepler, 442b, its crystalline spires reaching into the violet sky, like fingers grasping for stars. Among its corridors walked beings from 1,000 worlds, towering Vorthan warriors with their 4 arms and chitinous armor, graceful ethereal mystics whose translucent bodies shimmered with inner light, and the brutish Cronin shock troopers who could crush steel with their bare hands. And then there was Maya Chun. At 17 standard years, she was the youngest cadet ever admitted to the academy. Standing barely 5 feet tall among giants, her slight frame seemed almost comical next to her classmates. The Vorthans had to look down nearly 3 meters to see her face. The Cronins could have used her as a toothpick. Even the delicate ethereals towered over her like luminous trees. But Maya had something none of them possessed. She was human. The admissions board had been reluctant to accept her application. Humans were still newcomers to the galactic community, having only made contact 7 years ago when their primitive fusion drives had finally carried them beyond their solar system. Most species regarded them as cute but harmless, like domesticated pets that had somehow learned to speak. Maya's test scores had changed everything. Her tactical assessments broke academy records. Her strategic thinking surpassed master-level ethereal war minds. Her psychological profiles showed a level of adaptability that made the xenopsychologists question their instruments. When the physical requirements nearly eliminated her, she had simply smiled and asked for modified parameters. Size doesn't matter in space combat, she had told the review board, her dark eyes holding a confidence that seemed impossible for someone so young and small. Intelligence does. Adaptability does. The willingness to do what others won't, that matters most of all. They had admitted her on a probationary basis, expecting her to wash out within the first semester. That was 2 years ago. Now, as she walked through the academy's central hub, other cadets stepped aside not out of respect, but out of something deeper. The Vorthans, whose culture prized size and strength above all else, nodded to her with genuine deference. The ethereals, who typically ignored physical beings, watched her with fascination. Even the Cronins, who had never acknowledged any creature smaller than themselves, gave her a wide berth. Maya carried herself with the easy confidence of someone who had nothing to prove because she had already proven everything. Her uniform was impeccably maintained, her posture perfect despite her diminutive stature. When she spoke, others listened, not because they had to, but because they had learned that Maya Chin's words carried weight far beyond her physical presence. The Academy's ranking system was brutal and transparent. Every cadet's performance was publicly displayed on massive holographic boards that updated in real time. Combat simulations, tactical exercises, leadership assessments, xenocultural studies, advanced physics, interstellar law, dozens of categories measured their progress toward becoming officers in the Galactic Defense Force. Maya's name occupied the top slot in every single category. But it wasn't her academic excellence that had earned her the Academy's respect. It was what had happened during the Proxima incident. The simulation had been designed to be unwinnable. A terrorist organization had seized a civilian station with 10,000 inhabitants, threatening to detonate antimatter charges if their demands weren't met. The scenario included political complications, civilian hostages, limited resources, and a ticking clock that made careful planning impossible. 17 different command teams had attempted the simulation over the past 5 years. All had failed. The best result had saved 60% of the civilians while losing half the rescue force. Maya's team had saved everyone. Her solution had been so unconventional that the simulation supervisors had initially declared it invalid. She had surrendered. Not the typical military surrender, a complete, unconditional capitulation that included handing over her ship, her crew, and herself to the terrorists. The other cadets on her team had stared at her in horror as she opened communications with the enemy and announced their intention to comply with all demands. What followed was 47 minutes of pure psychological warfare. Maya had identified the terrorist leader's psychological profile within the first 10 minutes of conversation. A failed military officer from the Centauran Republic, cashiered for cowardice during a border skirmish, now desperate to prove his worth through violence. She had spoken to his pride, his shame, his deep-seated need for recognition. She had offered him something no amount of antimatter could provide: redemption. By the time her rescue ships arrived, the terrorist leader was personally escorting hostages to safety, convinced that Maya had recognized his tactical genius and recruited him for a secret operation against their mutual enemies. His followers, confused but loyal, had helped load the civilians onto evacuation shuttles while Maya praised their discipline and professionalism. The simulation had ended with 0 casualties, all terrorists in custody, and Maya calmly explaining to her stunned teammates that violence was merely one tool among many, and rarely the most effective one. The Academy Commandant, a grizzled Vorthan veteran named Kextar, who had fought in 7 interstellar wars, had stared at the simulation results for nearly an hour before speaking. In 400 years of military service, he had said slowly, I have never seen anything like this. She didn't defeat the enemy. She convinced them to defeat themselves. Word of the Proxima simulation had spread throughout the Academy within hours. Maya found herself surrounded by cadets eager to understand her methods, to learn from her approach. She shared freely, explaining her reasoning with the patience of a teacher and the insight of someone far older than her years. But it wasn't just her tactical brilliance that impressed her classmates. It was her absolute fearlessness. During a zero-gravity combat exercise, Maya had faced off against Thraknor, a Cronin warrior twice her weight and 4 times her strength. The match should have lasted seconds. Instead, Maya had used the environment to her advantage, ricocheting off bulkheads, using her small size to maneuver through spaces Thraknor couldn't follow, striking at joints and pressure points with surgical precision. She hadn't won. Thraknor's reach and endurance had ultimately prevailed, but she had fought him to a standstill for nearly 20 minutes, forcing the massive warrior to work harder than he ever had against an opponent 1/10 his size. When the exercise ended, Thraknor had helped her to her feet with something approaching reverence. You fight like the death whispers of my homeworld, he had rumbled in his deep voice. Small, swift, and utterly without fear. I have never faced anything more dangerous. Maya had smiled and shaken his massive hand with both of hers. You're pretty scary yourself, big guy. Want to grab dinner and compare techniques? That was Maya, brilliant, fearless, and completely unpretentious. She treated the Academy's most intimidating cadets like old friends, shared her knowledge without reservation, and approached every challenge with the same calm confidence whether she was facing an impossible tactical scenario or a creature that could crush her without effort. The professors had begun using her solutions as case studies. Her approach to xenocultural integration had become required reading. Her tactical innovations were being transmitted to active duty officers throughout the fleet. At 19 standard years old, Cadet Maya Chun was already influencing military doctrine across 3 spiral arms. But none of her classmates truly understood what made Maya special until the day the apex arrived. The emergency alarms had started just after midnight, their wailing cry echoing through the Academy's dormitories and training facilities. Cadets stumbled from their quarters, confusion and fear evident on faces both alien and familiar. The Academy's defensive shields flickered to life, bathing the complex in an eerie blue glow. Through the transparent aluminum windows of the main corridor, they could see it, a ship unlike anything in their databases. Sleek and predatory, its black hull seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange geometries that hurt to look at directly suggested technologies beyond current understanding. It hung in space above the Academy like a dagger poised to strike. The ship was massive, easily 3 kilometers long, but it moved with a grace that defied its size. Weapons ports glowed with malevolent energy. Strange fields rippled around its hull, distorting space itself. This was clearly a warship, and one built by a species that understood destruction in ways the galaxy had never imagined. Academy security forces scrambled to battle stations, but everyone knew their weapons were designed for training, not actual combat. The Academy's orbital platforms were formidable, but they seemed pathetically inadequate against this technological nightmare. Then, the ship began transmitting. The message came in perfect galactic standard, though the voice that spoke it was unlike anything they had heard before. Deep, resonant, with harmonics that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the brain. I am Vextai, apex predator of the Void Hunt. I seek the small warrior who has claimed supremacy over this installation's combat trials. Present her to me, or I will take her by force. The transmission cut, leaving behind a silence that seemed to press against the eardrums. Cadets looked at each other with growing horror as the implications became clear. Maya stepped forward, her small figure moving through the crowd of towering aliens like a ship cutting through calm water. Her face was pale but determined, her dark eyes holding the same confidence they always did. I guess that's me, she said quietly. Commandant Kextar materialized beside her, his forearms crossed in a gesture of absolute refusal. Negative, Cadet Chun. You will remain in protective custody while we determine this creature's intentions. Maya looked up at him with an expression that was almost fond. Sir, with respect, that ship could turn this academy into vapor in about 30 seconds. If this Vextai wants to talk to me, maybe we should listen to what he has to say. You don't understand, Kextar rumbled, his usually composed demeanor cracking slightly. The Apex are legends. Stories used to frighten children. They're supposed to be extinct. Well, apparently they're not, Maya said reasonably. And one of them is here asking for me specifically. That suggests this isn't a random attack. Before Kextar could respond, the Academy's main communications array activated without authorization. The alien ship was overriding their systems effortlessly, projecting its signal directly into the central hub where hundreds of cadets had gathered. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a figure that made several cadets step backward instinctively. Vextai was humanoid in the loosest sense, tall and lean, with elongated limbs that suggested both grace and lethal efficiency. His skin was the color of deep space, black with patterns of silver that moved like living constellation maps. His face was angular and predatory, with large eyes that held depths like event horizons. But it was his smile that truly unsettled them. Too wide, with too many teeth, each one sharp enough to cut diamond. Hello, little warrior, Vextai said, his gaze finding Maya among the crowd with unsettling accuracy. I have traveled far to meet the human who has impressed even the proud Vorthans with her tactical mind. Your reputation precedes you across the spiral arms. Maya stepped forward, ignoring Kextar's restraining gesture. When she spoke, her voice was steady despite the fact that she was addressing a creature that could apparently annihilate their entire installation. I'm honored by your interest, she said formally. Though I'm curious why an apex predator would seek out an academy cadet. Vextai's smile widened impossibly. Because, small one, you are not truly a cadet, are you? Your tactical displays suggest a mind that has evolved for warfare in ways that make even my kind take notice. The simulation you designated Proxima, that was not the work of a student. That was art. I appreciate the compliment, Maya replied carefully. But I'm still not sure what you want from me. I want to understand you, Vextai said simply. Your species is new to us, yet you demonstrate capabilities that typically require millennia of evolution to develop. You solve problems that stymie beings with centuries of military experience. You face opponents who could destroy you without concern, yet they retreat from your presence with something approaching awe. He leaned forward in his transmission, his dark eyes boring into Maya's. You are a predator, little human. Perhaps the deadliest predator I have ever encountered. And I would know, hunting predators is what my kind does. The implications of that statement sent ripples of unease through the watching cadets. The Apex were known, even in legends, as beings who hunted the galaxy's most dangerous creatures for sport. If this Vextai was here because he considered Maya a worthy target. But Maya's expression didn't change. She met the Apex's gaze steadily, her small frame radiating a composure that seemed impossible under the circumstances. If you're here to hunt me, she said quietly, I should probably mention that I don't go down easy. Vextai threw back his head and laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with distant thunder. Oh, little warrior, you misunderstand completely. I am not here to hunt you. His expression grew serious, almost reverent. I am here to guard you. The silence that followed was so complete that the Academy's air recycling systems seemed thunderously loud. Cadets stared at the holographic display with expressions ranging from confusion to outright disbelief. An apex predator, a creature of legend that supposedly hunted the galaxy's most dangerous beings for sport, had just declared his intention to serve as bodyguard to a 19-year-old human girl who barely reached his waist. Maya, for her part, looked as surprised as everyone else. Guard me? From what? Vextai's expression grew grave. From others like me. Your tactical displays have not gone unnoticed, small warrior. The Void Hunt has taken an interest in your species, and they do not share my protective instincts. He gestured to something beyond the camera's range, and the transmission expanded to show the interior of his ship. The bridge was a masterwork of predatory design, all flowing curves and sharp angles, built for both beauty and lethality. But it was the trophies that made several cadets gasp in recognition. Mounted along the walls were artifacts from across the galaxy's deadliest species. A Cronin Warchief's ceremonial mace. an ethereal warmind's crystalline core, the battle-scarred hull fragment of a Vorthan dreadnought, dozens of other items that spoke of battles fought, and one against opponents that were considered the pinnacle of their species' military might. I have hunted for 3,000 years, Vextai said quietly. I have faced the galaxy's apex predators in single combat, and emerged victorious. But your tactical display against the Proxima scenario, that showed me something I have never seen before. He paused, his dark eyes finding Maya's again through the transmission. Perfect predation. Not the crude application of superior force or the elegant manipulation of environmental advantages. Something deeper. You identified your prey's psychological structure, mapped their emotional responses, and then convinced them to destroy themselves while believing they were achieving victory. That is not tactics, little human. That is evolution made manifest. Maya frowned slightly. I just talked to them, found common ground, gave them what they needed to save face while accomplishing the mission objectives. You made them love you for destroying them, Vextai corrected gently. That terrorist leader left that simulation convinced that you had offered him redemption. His followers believed they had been recruited for a noble cause. They helped you achieve total victory while experiencing only gratitude for the privilege of serving you. The apex leaned forward again, his expression intense. That is the most dangerous capability I have ever witnessed. And when the Void Hunt learns of it, which they will come for you. Commandant Kextar stepped into the transmission range, his forearms spread in a gesture of protective authority. The Academy will not surrender one of our cadets to alien threats. If your people wish to negotiate, they can do so through proper diplomatic channels. Vextai's laugh was softer this time, but no less unsettling. Honored Commandant, you misunderstand the nature of what approaches. The Void Hunt does not negotiate. They do not recognize diplomatic immunity. They are what your species might call the thing that hunts the hunters. When they decide to claim a prey, entire star systems have been known to evacuate rather than stand in their way. He turned his attention back to Maya. But they have never faced a human. And they have certainly never faced you. Maya studied the alien predator for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Around her, hundreds of cadets waited in tense silence for her response. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the same calm confidence it always did. So what are you proposing? I propose to teach you, Vextai said simply. Your mind is already that of an apex predator, but your body is still limited by your species' physical constraints. I can show you how to transcend those limitations, how to move through space as we do, how to think in dimensions your mind has not yet discovered. His smile returned, predatory but somehow warm. And, in return, you can teach me how to convince my enemies to destroy themselves while thanking me for the opportunity. Maya glanced around at her classmates, beings from across the galaxy who had become her friends, her comrades, her chosen family. The fear in their eyes was not for themselves, but for her. They had all seen what she could do, had all benefited from her friendship and guidance. The thought of losing her to some incomprehensible alien threat was clearly devastating. When she looked back at Vextai, her expression had hardened into something resembling his own predatory intensity. And if I refuse? Then, the Void Hunt will eventually find you, he said matter-of-factly. And they will test you as they test all potential threats to the galactic order. If you fail their tests, your species will be classified as prey. The implications hung in the air like a sword suspended over their heads. Maya's choice would not just determine her own fate, but potentially that of all humanity. But, when she smiled, it was with the same fearless confidence that had carried her through every challenge the Academy had thrown at her. Well, she said quietly, I guess we'd better make sure I don't fail. The Apex ship Nightfall Requiem was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. Walking through its corridors was like moving through the digestive system of some vast predator, all flowing organic curves and surfaces that seemed to pulse with their own inner life. The walls were composed of a material that looked like living obsidian, smooth and dark, but somehow warm to the touch. Maya had insisted on bringing 3 companions from the Academy. Kextar had volunteered immediately, claiming responsibility for her safety as her commanding officer. Thraknor had simply stated that where Maya went, he would follow. But the most surprising volunteer had been Ceylin, an ethereal mystic whose translucent form now shimmered with nervous energy as she floated beside them. This ship is wrong, Ceylin whispered, her musical voice tight with concern. The quantum resonance patterns, they're not just technological. They're biological. This vessel is alive. Vextai, who had been walking ahead of them, turned with that unsettling smile. Very perceptive, young mystic. The Nightfall Requiem is grown, not built. She is as much my companion as my vessel. We have hunted together for nearly 2 millennia. As if responding to his words, the corridor around them pulsed gently, and Maya could swear she felt the ship's attention focus on her. It was not an unpleasant sensation, merely evaluative, like being examined by an intelligence vast and alien, but not hostile. She likes you, Vextai observed, watching Maya's reaction with interest. That is unusual. The Requiem typically finds non-apex beings to be beneath notice. Maya reached out to touch the wall, feeling the warm pulse of life beneath her palm. Hello, she said quietly. Thank you for having us aboard. The ship's response was immediate, a gentle harmonic vibration that seemed to convey welcome and curiosity. Salen gasped, her ethereal form flickering with surprise. She acknowledged you, the mystic stammered. Apex vessels are not supposed to recognize other species as worthy of communication. As I said, Vextai murmured, unusual. He led them deeper into the ship, through chambers that served purposes Maya couldn't immediately identify. Some were clearly living spaces, but designed for a physiology that could comfortably exist in 3 dimensions simultaneously. Others housed technologies that seemed to blend organic and mechanical elements in ways that made her head spin. Finally, they arrived at what Vextai called the training nexus. The chamber was vast, easily the size of the Academy's main gymnasium, but its most striking feature was the complete absence of any fixed reference points. The floor, walls, and ceiling were all composed of the same dark, flowing material, and as Maya watched, the surfaces began to shift and change, creating an environment that defied conventional understanding of up and down. The first lesson, Vextai said, his voice carrying easily through the space despite its size, is to abandon the comfortable illusions your mind uses to navigate 3-dimensional space. True predators do not limit themselves to single planes of movement. Maya watched as gravity itself seemed to become negotiable within the chamber. Vextai stepped onto what had been a wall moments before, his orientation shifting smoothly as the surface became his new floor. The transition was so seamless that it took her brain several seconds to process what she had witnessed. How? She asked simply. Apex vessels exist partially outside normal spacetime, he explained, gesturing for her to follow. We discovered long ago that the universe's fundamental forces are more guidelines than laws, if you understand how to ask them politely to step aside. Maya approached the wall, or what her mind insisted was still a wall, and placed her hand against it. The surface felt solid and stable, exactly like a floor should feel. But when she tried to step onto it, her inner ear screamed in protest as her sense of orientation shifted 90 degrees. She stumbled, caught herself, and then straightened with a determined expression. Again, for the next several hours, Maya practiced moving through the training nexus, while Vextai adjusted gravity, spatial orientation, and even the basic flow of time within localized areas. Her companions watched with a mixture of fascination and horror as she gradually learned to navigate an environment that challenged every assumption about how reality should work. Thraknor, despite his warrior's pride, had attempted the exercise once and immediately retreated, his massive frame shaking with vertigo. Salen had fared better, her natural ability to float allowing her some adaptation. But the constantly shifting reference points had left her disoriented and nauseous. Even Kextar, with centuries of combat experience in zero-gravity environments, had found the training nexus overwhelming. But Maya persisted. Each fall taught her something new. Each moment of disorientation became a lesson in adapting to impossible circumstances. By the time Vextai called a halt to the session, she was moving through the shifting space with something approaching confidence. Remarkable, the apex murmured, watching her land gracefully on a surface that had been sealing just moments before. Most beings require weeks to achieve basic competency in a dimensional flux environment. You're already demonstrating intermediate spatial awareness. Maya wiped sweat from her forehead, her small frame trembling with exhaustion, but her eyes bright with excitement. It's like solving a puzzle where the pieces keep changing shape. Once you stop trying to force the old rules to apply, it becomes intuitive isn't the right word, but logical in a different way. Exactly. Vextai's smile held genuine approval. You're beginning to think like an apex. Over the following days, the training intensified. Vextai introduced Maya to technologies that seemed to blur the line between tool and organism. Weapons that bonded with their wielder's nervous system, providing feedback that allowed for impossible accuracy. Armor that was more symbiont than protection, adapting to threats in real time and augmenting her natural capabilities. But the most challenging aspect of her education wasn't technological, it was philosophical. Your species thinks in terms of victory and defeat, Vextai explained as they sat in the ship's observation lounge, watching stars stream past at velocities that conventional physics insisted were impossible. But true predation transcends such crude concepts. Maya sipped from a cup containing something that tasted like liquid starlight and felt her consciousness expand slightly. Apex nutrition was apparently designed to enhance cognitive function as well as sustain the body. Then what's the goal? She asked. Understanding, he said simply. Perfect predation requires perfect understanding of your prey. Their motivations, their fears, their hidden desires, their psychological structures, everything that makes them what they are. Only when you understand them completely can you predict how they will respond to any given stimulus. He gestured to a holographic display that showed dozens of alien species, each with detailed psychological and cultural profiles. The Void Hunt has spent millennia cataloging the galaxy's predatory species. We know how Cronins will respond to challenges to their honor. We understand the Vorthan's cultural emphasis on strength hierarchy. We have mapped the ethereal's complex relationship between individual consciousness and collective awareness. Maya studied the displays, her analytical mind absorbing the patterns and connections. But you don't have a profile for humans. Precisely. Your species appeared too recently for proper analysis. But your individual displays have provided concerning data points. He manipulated the holographic controls, and Maya's own academy records appeared. Tactical assessments, psychological evaluations, performance metrics, and detailed breakdowns of her various solutions to impossible scenarios. Your approach to the Proxima simulation revealed capabilities that do not match our understanding of typical human psychology. The way you identified and manipulated the terrorist leader's emotional structures suggests an intuitive understanding of predatory psychology that typically requires centuries of training. Maya frowned. I just talked to him, found out what he needed to hear. You performed deep psychological surgery while making him believe you were simply having a conversation, Vextai corrected. That is not a skill that develops naturally. It suggests that your species, or at least you specifically, may have evolved capabilities that make you natural apex predators. The implications of that statement settled over Maya like a heavy blanket. If humans were potentially apex predators, and the Void Hunt made a practice of testing such beings. When are they coming? She asked quietly. Soon. My ship's quantum wake will have been detected the moment we entered this system. The Hunt will know that I have made contact with you, and they will come to determine whether my interest was justified. Vextai leaned forward, his expression serious. There will be 3 of them. Kryshar the Mindbreaker, who will attempt to shatter your psychological defenses through direct mental assault. Zephin the World Killer, who will test your ability to think strategically under impossible pressures. And Nixtara the Silence, who will evaluate your capacity to face absolute terror without losing yourself. Maya absorbed this information with the same calm attention she brought to all her studies. And if I fail their tests, then they will classify humanity as a potential threat to galactic stability and recommend preemptive action to the Apex Council. Your species will face extermination before you can develop your predatory capabilities to their full potential. The weight of entire species' fate settling on her shoulders should have been crushing. Instead, Maya felt a familiar sense of calm focus settling over her. The same state of mind she entered when facing any impossible challenge. Then, I suppose I'd better not fail. Training with Vextai intensified as they waited for the Void Hunt to arrive. Maya learned to move through dimensions that didn't technically exist, to think in patterns that transcended linear time, to perceive reality through sensory modalities her species had never evolved. But, more importantly, she learned about herself. The combat exercises revealed that her small size and apparent fragility were actually advantages in the kind of warfare the Apex practiced. She was faster than opponents who outweighed her by orders of magnitude, more agile than beings whose strength could crush starships. Her human reflexes, evolved for pursuit hunting on ancient African plains, translated surprisingly well to the fluid, three-dimensional combat of advanced space-dwelling predators. The tactical scenarios showed her that her approach to problem-solving was fundamentally different from any species the Apex had encountered. Where other beings would apply force, technology, or superior knowledge, Maya instinctively looked for psychological leverage points, ways to convince her opponents that surrender was actually victory, that defeat was really triumph. But the psychological training was the most revealing. You don't think like other humans, Vextai observed after watching her work through a scenario designed to test empathy and emotional manipulation. Your tactical records from the academy suggest that your classmates regard you as warm and friendly. Yet your approach to psychological warfare shows a capacity for emotional manipulation that would make my own kind uncomfortable. Maya paused in her analysis of the exercise. I care about my friends. I want to protect them. But when I'm facing an enemy, she searched for the right words. It's like there are two different people in my head. One who loves and laughs and enjoys dinner with Thraknor, and one who can look at a terrorist leader and see exactly which emotional buttons to push to make him dance to my tune. That duality is the mark of a true apex predator, Vextai said quietly. The ability to maintain genuine emotional connections while still being capable of perfect psychological manipulation when necessary. Most species lose one capacity or the other. They become either monsters or victims. You have achieved balance. Is that why you're protecting me? Because I'm some kind of psychological weapon. Vextai was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I am protecting you, he said finally, because in 3,000 years of hunting the galaxy's deadliest predators, you are the first being I have ever met who made me feel like prey. The admission hung between them like a challenge. Maya looked up at the towering alien warrior who had claimed victory over dozens of species' greatest champions, and felt a moment of genuine surprise. I've never tried to hurt you, she said softly. I know. That's what makes you so terrifying. His smile was genuinely warm despite its predatory nature. A true apex predator doesn't need to threaten. Their very existence is enough to reshape the behavioral patterns of everyone around them. You've been doing it since the day you arrived at the academy, and you don't even realize it. Maya thought about her classmates, how Thraknor had gradually become more thoughtful and strategic in his approach to combat, how Ceylin had started incorporating tactical thinking into her mystical practices, how even Kextar had begun questioning traditional military doctrine after watching her unconventional solutions. I just try to help people become the best versions of themselves, she said. Exactly. You're reshaping them into more effective versions without them realizing it's happening. They love you for it, which makes them even more eager to adopt your suggested modifications to their thinking. Vextai shook his head in admiration. That's not mentorship, little human. That's domestication. You're turning the galaxy's natural predators into your willing companions. The thought should have been disturbing. Instead, Maya felt a strange sense of recognition, as if he had named something she had always known about herself, but never had words for. Their conversation was interrupted by the ship's alert system, a harmonic tone that seemed to resonate through both hull and consciousness simultaneously. Vextai's expression immediately shifted to full predatory alertness. They're here, he said simply. The Nightfall Requiem's observation deck provided a perfect view of the arriving ships. Maya had expected something similar to Vextai's vessel, sleek, organic, and vaguely unsettling. What materialized from jump space was far worse. Kryshar's ship was a thing of crystalline angles and impossible geometries, its faceted surfaces refracting light in ways that made looking at it directly painful. Strange emanations pulsed from its core, and Maya could swear she heard whispers at the edge of consciousness when she tried to focus on it. Zephyr arrived in what could only be described as a weaponized asteroid, a massive chunk of dark matter wrapped around technologies that seemed to bend reality around them. Spatial distortions rippled out from its passage, and Maya realized that this ship could probably unmake entire solar systems if its captain felt inclined. But it was Nixtara's vessel that truly unnerved her. It wasn't there exactly. Maya knew something had arrived because her instincts screamed warnings at her, because space seemed somehow more empty in a particular direction. But when she tried to look directly at the ship, her eyes simply slid away as if it existed in a frequency her brain refused to process. The Void Hunt, Vextai said quietly. The three greatest predators our species has ever produced. They have never failed to break a prey species. Maya studied the impossible ships hanging in space around them, and felt the familiar calm focus settling over her mind. Somewhere in the back of her consciousness, That other part of herself, the part that could convince terrorists to thank her for destroying them, began to stir. Well, she said with that same fearless confidence that had carried her through every challenge she had ever faced. There's a first time for everything. The testing began immediately. Kryshar came for her mind first, his psychic assault hitting Maya like a tide of liquid darkness. She found herself trapped in a maze of crystalline corridors, each surface reflecting distorted versions of her worst fears and deepest shames. The academy burning while she watched helplessly, her friends torn apart by creatures she had led them to face, her parents receiving news of her death in some pointless alien war. But Maya had spent years learning to navigate impossible environments. The psychological maze was just another training nexus with different rules. She stopped trying to escape the reflections and started studying them instead. Each fear, each shame, each moment of self-doubt was perfectly crafted to exploit human psychological vulnerabilities. The attention to detail was remarkable. Kryshar had somehow mapped her emotional landscape with extraordinary precision, which meant he had to have a source for that information. Maya began tracking the connections between the psychic constructs, following the paths of influence and manipulation back to their origin points. It was like solving a mystery where the clues were emotions and the crime was her own despair. When she found Kryshar at the center of his maze, she smiled at him with genuine appreciation. "That was beautifully done," she said sincerely. The level of detail in the fear constructs suggests months of psychological analysis. "When did you start studying me?" The mindbreaker paused, his assault faltering slightly. In the physical world, he appeared as a being of living crystal, his faceted form containing swirling galaxies of thought and memory. His voice, when he spoke, seemed to come from inside her own mind. "You should be screaming," he said, confusion evident in his mental tone. "I have shown you the death of everything you claim to value." "You've shown me very sophisticated psychological modeling," Maya corrected gently. "But the fears aren't really mine. They're what you think my fears should be based on your analysis of human psychology in general, and my personality profile specifically." She gestured to the crystalline walls around them. "This is remarkable work, but it's like looking at a painting of a sunset instead of actual sunset. Beautiful, but not quite real enough to fool someone who's seen the original." Kryshar's assault shifted, becoming more direct and brutal. Raw terror flooded Maya's consciousness, primordial fears that predated human civilization, instinctive responses to predators that could devour souls as easily as flesh. Maya acknowledged the fear, accepted it, and then began to analyze its structure with the same clinical detachment she brought to any tactical problem. How was the terror being generated? What neurochemical pathways was it exploiting? Could she trace the psychic connection back to its source and disrupt it? "You're studying my attack while experiencing it," Kryshar said, his mental voice tight with disbelief. "That should be impossible. The terror I'm projecting should overwhelm any rational thought processes." "It probably would, for most humans," Maya agreed. "But I've never been most humans." She reached out through the psychic connection and touched Kryshar's consciousness directly. What she found there surprised her. Beneath the crystalline perfection and mental discipline was a core of genuine loneliness. The mindbreaker had spent millennia breaking the psyches of his prey, but the constant exposure to other beings' minds had gradually eroded his ability to connect with his own kind. "You're tired," she said softly. 3,000 years of tearing apart other minds, and you've forgotten what it feels like to simply talk to someone. The psychic assault stopped, as if a switch had been thrown. Kryshar stared at her through dimensions of consciousness, his crystalline form flickering with something that might have been surprise. "How did you?" "You had to understand my mind to attack it," Maya explained. "But understanding creates connection, and connection works both ways. I can see you now, and what I see is someone who's forgotten how to be anything but a weapon." She extended her consciousness toward him, not as an attack, but as an offering. "When was the last time someone just wanted to be your friend?" The psychological maze around them began to dissolve as Kryshar's concentration shattered. When it was gone, they stood facing each other in empty space, two minds touching across the void between species. "I don't understand," the mindbreaker whispered. "You should hate me. Fear me. I showed you the destruction of everything you care about." Maya smiled with the same warmth she had always shown her academy classmates. "You showed me a very sophisticated illusion designed to test my psychological resilience. It was actually quite impressive from a technical standpoint. But, more importantly, it let me see who you really are underneath all that crystalline armor." She reached out. Somehow, impossibly, her consciousness took on enough physicality to touch his faceted surface. Thank you for the test. And thank you for letting me see the real you. Kreishar jerked backward as if she had struck him. His form flickered between dimensions, cycling through what appeared to be centuries of accumulated psychological defenses. What did you do to me? He demanded. I treated you like a person instead of a test, Maya said simply. Is that really so unusual? The mindbreaker stared at her for a long moment, then began to laugh, a sound like breaking glass that somehow conveyed wonder instead of malice. Vextai was right, he said finally. You're the most dangerous predator any of us have ever encountered. And you don't even realize it. The psychic connection dissolved, returning Maya to the physical world aboard the Nightfall Requiem. She found herself lying on the floor of the observation deck, with Vextai and her companions standing over her with expressions of barely controlled panic. How long was I out? She asked, accepting Thraknor's massive hand to help her stand. 17 minutes, Kextara rumbled. We could see the psychic battle through the ship's quantum resonance displays. Your mind was being systematically dismantled and rebuilt. No being should have been able to maintain consciousness through such an assault. Maya brushed off her uniform and checked to make sure all her pieces were still properly attached. Kreishar is very good at what he does. But I think we reached an understanding. Before anyone could ask what she meant, space around them shimmered, and the mindbreaker's ship began to change. The painful crystalline angles softened, becoming more organic and approachable. The psychic emanations that had been whispering at the edge of consciousness faded to a barely perceptible hum. He's withdrawing from offensive posture, Ceylin observed, her ethereal form brightening with surprise. I've never heard of an apex voluntarily reducing their threat profile during a hunt. One test down, Maya said quietly, watching Zephin's weaponized asteroid begin to move toward them. 2 to go. Zephin's test began without warning or explanation. One moment Maya was standing on the observation deck of the Nightfall Requiem, and the next she found herself alone in the command center of what appeared to be a massive starship under attack. Emergency lights bathed everything in crimson, and damage reports scrolled across dozens of displays in languages she somehow understood despite never having seen them before. The ship was dying around her, systems failing in cascade patterns that spoke of careful, systematic destruction rather than random battle damage. Admiral Chun, a voice called from behind her. Maya turned to see a figure in a Terran Defense Force uniform, a designation that didn't exist yet, but felt absolutely real in this constructed reality. The enemy has broken through the outer defensive lines. Estimated time to planetary bombardment is 14 minutes. Maya looked at the tactical displays and felt her breath catch. The planet below was Earth. Not the Earth of her time, but a future Earth with billions of inhabitants spread across floating cities and orbital habitats. The attacking fleet was massive, hundreds of ships using technologies that seemed designed specifically to counter human military doctrine. How many civilians? She asked, slipping into the role Zephin had created for her. 8 billion on the planet itself, another 2 billion in the orbital installations. The evacuation fleets can't move that many people in the time we have remaining. Maya studied the tactical situation with the same analytical approach she brought to every impossible scenario. The attacking fleet was positioned to prevent any escape from the planet's gravity well. Their weapons were optimized for orbital bombardment rather than ship-to-ship combat, suggesting their goal was extermination rather than conquest. But there was something wrong with the tactical display. The enemy formation was too perfect, their positioning too optimal. Real fleet actions were messy, chaotic affairs where advantage shifted constantly. This looked more like a theoretical exercise designed to test specific decision-making parameters. What are our assets? She asked. The Third Fleet, 87 vessels, mostly destroyers and frigates. The Terran defense grid has taken severe damage, but 12 orbital platforms remain operational. And the officer hesitated. The Prometheus Protocol has been authorized for your discretion. Maya felt a chill run through her. In this constructed reality, she somehow knew exactly what the Prometheus Protocol entailed, a weapon system capable of sterilizing entire star systems, including the one they were trying to protect. This was Zephin's test. Force her to choose between certain defeat and Pyrrhic victory. Save humanity by destroying the very people she was trying to protect. Maya smiled. Patch me through to the enemy fleet commander, she said. Admiral, they haven't responded to any communication attempts. Intelligence suggests they're operating under a doctrine of total extermination. Then, we'll have to get creative. Open a channel on all frequencies, emergency bands, military channels, even civilian radio, if necessary. I want every ship in that fleet to hear this. The communications officer looked confused but complied. A moment later, he nodded. Channel open, Admiral. Maya took a deep breath and began to speak in the same calm, confident voice that had convinced terrorists to thank her for defeating them. This is Admiral Maya Chun of the Terran Defense Force, speaking to the commanding officers of the attacking fleet. I want to talk to whoever's in charge out there. Silence stretched for nearly a minute before a response came. A voice that sounded like grinding metal wrapped around liquid hatred. I am Warlord Kethfor of the Hegemony Extermination Fleet. Your species has been designated for removal. There will be no negotiation. Maya studied the tactical display while maintaining the conversation. I understand your position, Warlord, and I want you to know that I respect the professionalism your fleet has shown. Your tactical deployment is textbook perfect. I couldn't have positioned for orbital bombardment better myself. A pause. You seek to delay us with flattery. Not at all. I'm acknowledging superior tactical planning when I see it. Your formation prevents any escape from the planet. Your weapons are optimized for surface bombardment. And you've positioned your command ships to maintain communication integrity throughout the bombardment sequence. It's beautifully executed. Maya manipulated the tactical display, highlighting specific aspects of the enemy formation. In fact, your deployment is so perfect that it tells me everything I need to know about your strategic doctrine, your command structure, and your psychological profile. Another pause, longer this time. Explain. Your formation assumes we'll try to evacuate civilians or mount a direct defense of the planet. But you've left your flanks exposed to a different kind of attack entirely. You're thinking like conquerors, not like humans. She began entering commands into the tactical computer, her fingers moving with the same confidence she brought to Academy simulations. See, you made one critical error in your analysis of human psychology. You assumed we'd choose between saving our people and destroying our enemies. The tactical display showed her fleet beginning to move, but not toward the planet or the enemy formation. Instead, they were spreading out into a pattern that seemed to make no strategic sense. What are you doing? Kethfor demanded. I'm solving your problem, Maya said cheerfully. You see, your species sent you here to exterminate humanity because you see us as a threat to galactic stability. But, you're right, we are dangerous. Not because we're aggressive, but because we're really good at making friends. The Terran ships had finished their deployment, forming a loose sphere around the enemy fleet at maximum weapon range. But, instead of firing, they began broadcasting. Every ship in my fleet is now transmitting detailed tactical analyses of your formation, complete psychological profiles of your command staff based on their deployment decisions, and comprehensive information about your technological capabilities. We're sending this data to every species in this sector. Maya's smile was visible in her voice. By the time this engagement is over, every military and local space will know exactly how to counter your tactical doctrine. Your hegemony will have lost its strategic advantage over dozens of potential enemies. You're bluffing, Kethfor snarled, but uncertainty was creeping into his voice. Am I? Check your long-range scanners. How many ships are moving toward this system right now? How many species do you think would love to have detailed intelligence on hegemony military capabilities? The silence stretched longer this time. Maya used the pause to continue her analysis, feeding more information to the broadcasting stations. Here's what's going to happen, Warlord. If you proceed with the bombardment, you'll successfully exterminate humanity. But you'll also hand every enemy your species has ever made a complete tactical manual for defeating your forces. The hegemony will face uprisings on a dozen worlds within the year. Maya's voice took on the same gentle persuasiveness she had used with the terrorist leader in the Proxima simulation. But if you withdraw now, you can report that humanity was eliminated by a carefully planned strategic withdrawal. You preserve your tactical secrets, maintain your strategic advantage, and accomplish your mission of removing us as a threat. You would sacrifice your entire species to spite us. I would sacrifice my entire species to protect the galaxy from you, Maya said simply. But I'd rather find a solution where everyone gets what they need. She manipulated the tactical display again, showing detailed analyses of the hegemony fleet's capabilities and weaknesses. I'm transmitting the complete contents of our defensive database to every ship in your fleet. Ship designs, weapon specifications, tactical doctrines, everything. Consider it a gesture of good faith. You're giving us information on how to kill you more efficiently. I'm showing you that we're not the threat you think we are. Look at our weapons, Warlord. Look at our ship designs. What do you see? Another pause as the enemy commander studied the transmitted data. When he spoke again, confusion was evident in his voice. These are defensive systems, evacuation protocols, medical facilities. Where are your offensive capabilities? We don't really have any, Maya admitted. We're not a military species, Kethfor. We're explorers, diplomats. We build hospitals, not weapons. We make friends, not enemies. She gestured to the tactical display showing the positioning of her fleet. Look at my formation. Really look at it. I'm not positioned to attack you. I'm positioned to make sure that when you destroy us, every species in local space will know exactly how you did it. This is madness. This is human nature. We don't win through superior force or advanced technology. We win by convincing our enemies that destroying us will cost them more than leaving us alone. Maya leaned forward, her voice carrying absolute sincerity. I'm offering you victory without consequences, Warlord. Withdraw now, report that humanity has been neutralized as a threat, and preserve your tactical advantages for real enemies. Everyone wins. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya could feel the weight of 10 billion lives hanging on her ability to convince an alien warlord that mercy was actually strategy. When Kethfor finally spoke, his voice carried grudging respect. You would have made a formidable enemy, Admiral Chun. I'd rather be a useful friend. Perhaps the hegemony was hasty in our threat assessment. Humanity's diplomatic capabilities may indeed serve galactic stability better than their elimination. The tactical display showed the enemy fleet beginning to power down their weapon systems. We will withdraw and report that the human threat has been contained through alternative means. Thank you, Warlord. Your wisdom may have prevented a very ugly war, and your cunning may have saved your species. We will not forget this lesson. The communication ended, and Maya watched as the massive enemy fleet began to withdraw from the system. As they departed, her own ships powered down their broadcasting arrays and began returning to defensive positions around the planet. The constructed reality shimmered and dissolved, returning Maya to the observation deck of the Nightfall Requiem. She found herself face-to-face with a being that could only be Zephyr, massive even by Apex standards, his form seeming to contain the gravitational pull of collapsed stars. Impossible, he rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. The scenario was designed to force a choice between surrender and genocide. There was no third option. Maya shrugged. There's always a third option. You just have to be creative about finding it. You convinced an enemy fleet to withdraw by threatening to give them detailed intelligence about your own weaknesses. I convinced them that destroying humanity would create more problems than it solved. Sometimes the best way to win is to make sure your enemy doesn't want to fight in the first place. Zephyr stared at her for a long moment, his massive form radiating something that might have been admiration. In 4,000 years of tactical analysis, I have never encountered a solution like that. You redefine the parameters of the engagement entirely. That's what humans do, Maya said simply. We're really good at changing the rules of the game. The World Killer's ship began to move away from the Nightfall Requiem, its massive bulk somehow conveying grudging respect. As it departed, space around them seemed to become somehow lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. But Maya's attention was already focused on the third member of the Void Hunt. Nixtara the Silence had remained motionless throughout the previous tests, her ship existing in that strange not-there state that made Maya's eyes water to look it directly. One more, she said quietly. Vextai moved to stand beside her, his expression troubled. Nixtara's test is different. Kryshar attacks the mind, Zephyr challenges tactical thinking, but the Silence tests something deeper. She will show you absolute terror, not fear of death or failure, but fear of meaninglessness. Fear that nothing you do matters, that the universe is empty and cold and indifferent to all suffering. Maya nodded, her calm focus settling over her like familiar armor. How do I fight despair? You don't fight it, Vextai said softly. You survive it. And if you're strong enough, you find meaning despite it. The third test began without transition or warning. Maya found herself floating in absolute void, not the clean darkness of space, but true nothingness. No stars, no reference points, no sense of up or down or distance. She was alone in a universe that had never contained anything but emptiness. And then Nixtara spoke, her voice coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Look upon the truth, small human. This is what lies beneath all your noble struggles and grand gestures. Emptiness, meaninglessness, the heat death of entropy consuming all things. Maya tried to speak, but found she had no voice in this place. She tried to move, but movement had no meaning when there was nowhere to go. She was trapped in absolute philosophical vacuum, confronted with the possibility that everything she had ever done or ever could do was ultimately pointless. Images began to form in the void, her friends at the academy, aging and dying while she accomplished nothing. Her species, spreading across the galaxy only to face extinction when the stars burned out. Civilizations rising and falling in meaningless cycles, their greatest achievements reduced to cosmic dust. You sought to protect your friends, Nixthara whispered. But protection from what? Death comes for all beings. Pain is the natural state of existence. Love is merely chemical reactions that evolution programmed to ensure reproduction. Maya felt despair settling into her consciousness like ice forming in her veins. What was the point of anything? Why struggle against entropy when entropy always won in the end? But even as the philosophical darkness threatened to consume her, another part of her mind began to work. This was a test, which meant it had parameters, rules, goals, and if it had those things, it could be solved. The question wasn't whether the universe had inherent meaning. That was a philosophical debate that had occupied sentient beings for millions of years. The question was whether meaning could be created despite the absence of cosmic purpose. Maya thought about Thraknor's friendship, offered freely despite every cultural conditioning that should have made him see her as weak prey. She thought about Saylin's gentle guidance, sharing mystical insights with someone from a completely different evolutionary path. She thought about Kekstar's protection, extending his duty of care beyond the minimum requirements because he had chosen to value her as an individual. None of these relationships had cosmic significance. The universe would not notice if they never existed. But they mattered to her, and she mattered to them, and that was enough. You're right, she said, somehow finding her voice in the void. The universe doesn't care about any of us. Entropy will win eventually. Everything we build will crumble, everyone we love will die, and ultimately none of it will matter on a cosmic scale. Nixthara's presence in the darkness seemed to pause, as if surprised by her agreement. But that's not the question, is it? Maya continued. The question isn't whether the universe has meaning. The question is whether we can create meaning despite the universe's indifference. Light began to flicker in the void, not from any external source, but from Maya's own consciousness refusing to accept absolute darkness. I can't give cosmic significance to my friendships with Thraknor and Saylin and Kekstar. But I can choose to value those relationships anyway. I can't prevent my species from facing extinction eventually, but I can work to make sure they live good lives while they exist. I can't stop entropy, but I can create pockets of order and beauty and love that shine brightly even if they don't shine forever. The light around her grew stronger, pushing back the philosophical darkness. That's what sentient beings do. We create meaning in defiance of meaninglessness. We love despite knowing that love ends. We build despite knowing that everything falls. We hope despite having no guarantee that hope is rational. Maya reached out into the void, not trying to grab anything but simply extending her hand in the same gesture of friendship she had always offered. Thank you for showing me the darkness. It makes the light more precious. Nixthara materialized in the void, a figure of living shadow that somehow conveyed ancient sadness and terrible wisdom. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of eons. How do you bear it? How do you accept the meaninglessness and continue to care about anything? Because caring is what makes us alive, Maya said simply. The universe might not have meaning, but we do. And as long as we exist, we can share that meaning with each other. She extended her hand toward the silence, offering the same friendship she had shown to Kryshar and the same respect she had given to Zephan. You've spent eternity contemplating the darkness. Would you like to see what sentient beings build in spite of it? Nixthara stared at the offered hand for a moment that seemed to stretch across cosmic time. Then, slowly, she reached out and touched Maya's fingers with her own shadowy appendage. The contact sent a shock through both of them, not pain, but recognition. In that moment, Maya felt the weight of Nixthara's eternal loneliness, her desperate search for meaning in an indifferent universe. And Nixthara felt Maya's quiet determination to create meaning despite that indifference, her simple decision to value love and friendship, and hope even when they were ultimately temporary. Impossible, the silence whispered. You touched the absolute void and came back with light. I came back with choice, Maya corrected gently. The same choice every sentient being makes every day, to find meaning in connection, purpose in caring, hope in the decision to keep trying. The void around them began to dissolve, replaced by the familiar interior of the Nightfall Requiem. But something had changed in Nixtharaz's ship, where before it had existed in that painful not-there state. Now it was simply invisible, a less hostile kind of concealment. Maya found herself back on the observation deck, surrounded by her worried companions and a profoundly shaken Vextai. The silence spoke, he said in wonderment. In 3,000 years, she has never communicated with anyone except the hunt. You made her remember that connection was possible. Through the ship's quantum resonance displays, they could see the 3 void hunt vessels moving into formation around the Nightfall Requiem. But instead of the predatory positioning they had maintained before, they now moved in patterns that suggested protection rather than threat. They're forming a guard formation, Celine observed, her ethereal voice bright with amazement. The Void Hunt is positioning to defend us rather than test us. Maya collapsed into a nearby chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. 3 impossible tests, 3 encounters with beings that considered themselves the galaxy's ultimate predators, and somehow she had not just survived but earned their protection. What happens now? She asked Vextai. Now, he said with that predatory smile that no longer seemed threatening. You finish your education at the academy. But you won't be finishing it alone. He gestured to the tactical displays showing the 4 apex ships maintaining formation. The Void Hunt has declared you worthy of protection. That means you now have the backing of the most feared predators in galactic space. Maya thought about returning to the academy with 4 apex predators as bodyguards and winced slightly. That's going to make combat studies class interesting. Indeed it will, Kextar rumbled, amusement evident in his voice. I suspect your classmates will find the new dynamic educational. As the Nightfall Requiem and its escorts began the journey back to the Galactic Military Academy, Maya stood at the observation window, watching the stars stream past. Somewhere out there, her friends and classmates were continuing their studies, unaware that their smallest member had just redefined the relationship between humanity and the galaxy's apex predators. But, more importantly, she had learned something about herself. She was dangerous, not because she was aggressive or violent, but because she had an unconscious talent for convincing others to become better versions of themselves. She could reshape enemies into allies, transform predators into protectors, and find meaning in the face of cosmic indifference. The academy had been designed to train military officers, but Maya suspected her real education was just beginning. She had 4 of the galaxy's deadliest predators willing to teach her their secrets, a species of naturally gifted psychological manipulators that had just announced their presence to the galaxy, and an entire universe full of impossible challenges waiting to be solved. Standing barely 5 feet tall among beings that could crush starships with their bare hands, Maya Chin smiled with quiet confidence. Size didn't matter. Technology didn't matter. Even cosmic indifference didn't matter. What mattered was the willingness to care, to connect, to find solutions that left everyone better than they were before. And that was something humans, especially this human, did very, very well. The galaxy's deadliest predator was indeed protecting the Academy's youngest and smallest cadet. But, perhaps more importantly, the Academy's youngest and smallest cadet was teaching the galaxy's deadliest predators what it really meant to be alive. In the end, that might prove to be the most dangerous lesson of all.